Okay, so in the last video, we distinguished between factual arguments and practical arguments. And although the study of practical reasoning is very interesting and rich, in this class we'll be focusing on factual arguments. So in this video, we're going to introduce another important distinction between different types of factual arguments: deductive arguments on the one hand, and inductive arguments on the other hand. Deductive and inductive arguments differ in the kind of support that the premises are supposed to provide for the conclusion. So consider the following argument. Everyone who studied for the exam passed the class. Dave studied for the exam, so Dave passed the class. This is a straightforward example of a deductive argument. Recalling back to our previous discussion of entailment, a good deductive argument is one where you'd be totally irrational if you accepted the premises but rejected the conclusion. And we can see that that's the case here. If it's true that everyone who studied for the exam passed the class, and it's true that Dave studied for the exam, how could it be false that Dave passed the class? There's just no way for that to be possible. So a deductive argument is one where the premises are supposed to provide absolute proof of the conclusion. So it's a very strong kind of argument. Let's compare that to the following kind of argument. The basketball team lost their first game of the season. The basketball team lost their second game of the season. The basketball team lost their third game of the season. So the basketball team will lose their next game. What do you think about this argument? Is it intuitively good or bad? It seems like a pretty good argument. If the basketball team lost their first 3 games of the season, then that gives us some reason to believe that they'll lose their next game as well. But is the conclusion entailed by the premises in this case? Let's think about it. Suppose you met someone who believed A, B, and C, but they didn't believe Z. Would we think this person is totally crazy or irrational? Well, I don't think so. Right? Maybe they know that the star point guard who's been injured for the beginning of the season is going to be coming back. He's going to play again. Or maybe they just have a feeling that the team is due for a win. In any case, it might not be a good team to bet on, but there's nothing irrational about accepting the premises and rejecting the conclusion. Whereas it would be rational to accept the premises but not the conclusion for the previous argument that we saw. So an inductive argument is one where the premises are supposed to provide evidence or support for the conclusion, but not absolute certainty. Let's look at another example to become familiar with this. Alice has a dog and it's friendly. Bob has a dog and it's friendly. Carol has a dog and it's friendly. Therefore, all dogs are friendly. Okay, this is another example of an inductive argument. As you can see, inductive arguments usually involve making observations about some sample set, some particular instances, and then generalizing from those instances to a class of things as a whole. So in this case, we're inferring from a fact about a few dogs to a fact about all dogs. And that's the general shape that inductive arguments take, though they might not all look just like this. Let's look at 1 or 2 more examples just to get some practice with these concepts. So consider this argument. Most basketball players are tall. Bob is a basketball player. Therefore, Bob is tall. So is this a deductive or an inductive argument? In this case, this is an inductive argument. Why is that? Well, again, we have the same kind of pattern where you're generalizing from a subset, which is most basketball players, and then you're kind of assuming all basketball players are tall, so if Bob's a basketball player, then he's tall as well. So it involves generalizing from a small sample set to a larger class. And also, it doesn't seem to be a good deductive argument because the premises can be true, but the conclusion false. So it's not totally crazy for it to be the case that most basketball players are tall, but Bob just happens to be the unusual short basketball player. Okay, so in that sense, A and B don't entail Z in this argument, so it doesn't really make a good deductive argument, and it's generalizing from a sample set, so it has the characteristics of an inductive argument. Okay, let's take a look at this one. It rained yesterday. It rained the day before yesterday, so it's going to rain again today. Here again, we're dealing with an inductive argument. So the general pattern should be clear by now, but you take some observations about particular instances and use that to form hypotheses or projections or extrapolations from that data and apply it to other particular instances or the class as a whole. So here we're observing, okay, it's rained yesterday, the day before yesterday, so that provides some reason to believe that it's going to rain today, but again, it doesn't provide absolute conclusive proof, it just provides some evidence or support. Okay, finally, let's look at this one. It rained yesterday, it rained the day before yesterday, so it has rained at least twice in the past few weeks. Here we are dealing with a deductive argument. And why is that? Well, again, the form of the argument is kind of similar. In fact, the first two statements are the same. What makes this a deductive argument? Well, the conclusion has to follow from the premises, right? Basically, you're saying, here's two particular instances of rain. You're not generalizing or predicting anything on the basis of that, which would make it an inductive argument. You're just reformulating that information, right? So if it's rained yesterday and the day before, then that's 2 times that it's rained in the past week. So if the premises are true in this example, the conclusion simply has to be true. It's definitive proof. So that would make it a good deductive argument and not an inductive argument. Okay, so we've introduced the distinction between deductive arguments and inductive arguments in this video. Primarily we'll be focused on deductive arguments in this class. Inductive reasoning is somewhat more complex, and it'll be a good starting point to work with deductive arguments. However, this distinction will be very relevant as we proceed.